Because I want to be goofy and unique, I'm going to divide everything from the beginning to chapter 5 and around the midway point of chapter 6, and everything afterwards, into their own separate segments. This is because I, like many others, believe there to be a fairly significant gap in quality between the two, though how big a gap I ultimately view that to be may end up surprising you.
Here I am, staring at my own palms. I feel the warmth of your hand. I thought I'd be forever by your side, protecting you, assuming that's what you wanted to. I had no clue that we had nothing between us. Perhaps I was so scared to know the truth. Now that you're gone, and yet your love is still embracing me, I'm at a loss. I need you with me. It's like I'm drowning, as if I've lost the way. But you always appear, as if you guide my way. I thought I could do it all. I had my confidence, but now I'm left alone with no one by my
The TLDR for this section is the following. There is a good reason that the ending of chapter 5 and beginning of chapter 6 have their praises sung so highly and so regularly in this community. They are genuinely that incredible, and I say that with absolute sincerity. The dialogue, voice acting, choreography, music, and writing is all some of the strongest I've experienced in any piece of media, and it's a sequence I don't see myself forgetting anytime soon because of it. This chain of cutscenes has fucking broken many a brave soul who reacts to it, and I get an unhealthy amount of pleasure from watching these people suffer on YouTube. I promise I'm not a sadist. It is perhaps the highlight of the entire series in terms of the storytelling's sheer quality, although I would argue Torna's ending gives it a run for its money, and I honestly don't know if I'm going to be able to do justice to it in this video. The scenes which take place in the city also technically fall under this section too, huh? Talking about the prison sequence makes it easy to forget about them, but these scenes too are absolutely beautiful, yet heart-wrenching, and I have pretty much nothing but praise to throw towards them. So, let's get started and do just that. As I said previously, I feel like the city scenes end up being a tad overshadowed by the prison sequence later in the chapter. After all, they are in the same chapter, which is easy to forget, but I believe they are almost just as wonderful as one another. This is more about world design than anything, but it's amazing finally seeing a proper large settlement that isn't just one of the scattered, minuscule colonies we've been seeing up till now. This can be used as an argument against the environment design in this game, specifically since the second game especially had so many distinct, detailed, huge and frankly beautiful cities, one for each individual titan, and that's fair, but I think this criticism ignores the fact that 3's world may well have been made like this by design. A thriving, lively, colourful metropolis like a city, one that feels truly lived in and culturally rich, rather than sterile and restrictive like every colony, is everything Mobius fears, because it's the type of place which breeds people that can see through their deception and who understand what life should really be like. The city does a wonderful job of showing this too. I mentioned much earlier that one of the things I find so beautiful about this story is how it glorifies the mundanity of everyday life, and this is the segment that came to mind when I said that. Furthermore, the very fact that its location is literally just called City is an awesome example of textual based storytelling, reflecting the fact that as it's the only place of its kind in Ionios, the city doesn't need a unique name. It's a minute bubble of liberty and peace in the turbulent, raging ocean of despair and depravity that is the world outside. Something I really love though is that it isn't entirely without flaws or conflict, perhaps being symbolic of the fact that real life, what the city represents, can never be completely perfect, and that's alright. Life needs some amount of suffering in order for the good moments to have meaning, and I genuinely believe that. What matters though is that it's a hell of a lot better than all of the depraved shit going on outside its walls. Off topic, but the way the city is set up in this world, as the one lone beacon of security and safety in a world of chaos and danger, and separated by great walls, reminds me a lot of the walled city in Attack on Titan. It's a great concept. The aforementioned conflict present within the city is the division people have between themselves over what should be done concerning the crisis outside. Some, like the Van Dams, family members of the man we met in the beginning, Guernica, implore the city's people to live courageous, brave lives, fighting back against the tyranny of Mobius and freeing as many stranded soldiers as possible, just like how they did with our own party. However, other factions within the city view this as foolish, risking the lives of the city's people unnecessarily, and, as it turns out later, they may be right. But I think it's too easy to slip into this way of thinking, of burying your head in the sand and lying to yourself that people aren't suffering en masse beyond your restricted viewpoint of the world. After all, if it's not you that's at risk, why bother? This is the exact mentality that a certain character in a certain expansion story is entirely defined by, and while I won't get into it now, this same character is one I am genuinely surprised gets as little love as they do. I think their viewpoint is not only believable but relatable, and I'd love to possibly discuss it more. Before I continue, I was wondering what you guys would think of a possible video I've been ruminating over making concerning who I view as being the series' most underrated characters. Of course, the aforementioned individual would be within it. In fact, they're the one who gave me the video idea in the first place. Anyway, back to relevancy once more. What I view as being one of the best individual scenes in the game also takes place here, the maternity ward. It saddened me to see this truly beautiful moment taken totally out of context online, although I can't deny it does look quite funny when viewed without any knowledge of what's happening. Like, the writers definitely saw the opportunity for a humorous moment here and took it.
Alright then, lads and lasses. Who wants to know how babies are made?
But I'm also impressed they managed to pull it off without it, in my opinion, coming across as creepy or weird at all, unlike what would likely be the case in a certain other game, that I also adore, to be clear.
How may I be of service, master?
What really gets to me in this scene are the characters' reactions. Up to this point, as they are artificially born and aged up in cradles, they have had absolutely zero knowledge on the natural life cycle of a human being. It is perfectly believable, therefore, that their first encounter with a baby would be one of total bemusement. Tyon's reaction especially is incredible. We get to see a character renowned for his stoicism finally shed his uncaring demeanour and genuinely express pure, unadulterated joy in one of the cutest moments I've seen in a long time.
Wow, you're right. Mimi, it's incredible.
Let me have a turn. What? This is incredible, Senna.
However, I also view this scene as incredibly sad, in that our characters should not be reacting like this. The fact babies are so bizarre to them is genuinely tragic, as in a good and fair world it would be basic knowledge, one of the underlying, foundational facts we learn regarding life. And yet they lack even this. Having them see everything they were deprived of like this is devastating in every sense of the word, and if you somehow can't tell, I love how it's executed. Noah and Mio also get another really cute little moment here. It's cliche, but it works and I love it. Monica, Guernica's daughter, informs us that the queens who rule the two nations are merely sham figureheads put in place to encourage the soldiers to fight. However, there were originally two real queens that these mere facades are replicas of. Only one person in this world, other than Mobius, now knows their locations, and it's Monica's daughter, Gondor. The thing is, she's currently locked in an Agnian prison, requiring our characters to bust in to learn this information and break her out. The pace here slows to a grinding halt as we are forced to play through each individual day in sequence before the third, if I'm remembering correctly, when the prison break itself occurs. The thing is, upon escaping, we're immediately captured by Mobius. We've been tricked by a girl named Shania, a city resident who has sided with them. I haven't spoken much about her despite how much focus she's given around this point, especially in relation to Senna, and this is purposeful. To be honest, and I think this is going to be one of my most controversial takes throughout this whole video, Shania never really did it for me as a villain. One key reason may have been that N was another character for whom a lot of spotlight was put on during this section, and he very much overshadows her in almost every way in my opinion. Another reason I'm not particularly fond of Shania is that I don't really see how she relates to Senna in any meaningful way, with it almost feeling like the writers realised she hadn't had anything to do up till now, and so tried to force some artificial sense of similarity between the two. Senna as a whole is easily my least favourite character in the party, and this is one of the reasons why. She's never given a solid backstory as to why she's so insecure, as all of her development relates around Shania. But of course, this is all taking place in the present. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate Senna, and she's generally fun to have around. I just wish her backstory was explored at all, because the original cause of her internal doubt is never explained as far as I recall. The slow-paced nature of the prior section is something that, if it occurred at any other moment in the story, I would surely critique. However, I think its placement in the story here is very much deliberate, in that it takes place right before some of the most significant moments in the entire plot. This sequence is slow-paced in order to A, give you a breather in preparation for the insane shit that's about to go down, and B, so that said insane shit is more likely to catch you off guard. Additionally, C, the somewhat underwhelming nature of this section helps to make the overwhelming nature of everything that's about to happen hit all the harder. We find ourselves in a duel with Mobius, N and M, who have finally revealed their true identities to the party, but not before challenging us in combat. M goes first, and it's during this scene where some strange, out of place feeling shots and pauses take place. Remember these, as they'll become relevant, incredibly relevant later. Something I also haven't mentioned yet is how each Mobius has been granted a specific unique ability, and M is no different. Hers is the ability to temporarily swap consciousnesses with another person, which, again, is going to become incredibly important later on. N takes over for her and is fucking bodying us, causing Lanz and Senna to attempt a tragic sacrifice in order to defeat him, utilising the effect of an annihilation event caused by an Ouroboros form overheating. However, they're unsuccessful, as X cancels their interlink at the very last second, just before N would have been killed. I'm going to throw out a really bold take here and say that I think this genuinely may have worked better if Lanz and Senna had actually gone through with their sacrifice. Wait, don't click off yet, please, just hear me out here. I'll get to this later when I discuss some of my overarching complaints with this narrative, but I really dislike just how many fake out deaths, or moments where dead characters come back to life, there are in this game, and this is just another instance of that. It feels like a massive cop-out when the story hypes up someone's demise to an enormous extent, with dramatic music playing and tearful goodbyes, as they do here, only to do a sudden 180 at the last second because they're not brave enough to go through with it. Would they not have done this, and actually stuck with it in this instance, I'll concede that some other changes would have to be made. Firstly, in order for their deaths to mean something, I would agree that they'd need to be killing a major threat in doing so. However, I don't think it should be N. At this point, he hasn't been given his true time to shine, and that scene is one of the best in the game, so I really don't think it's worth throwing it away here. Instead, I suggest that X is the Mobius that their sacrifice ends up killing, with us also having been given some more backstory for her beforehand in this theoretical rewrite. Perhaps in this alternative version of the story, we are also taught that X and Y's continued existences each make Mobius as a collective whole stronger, meaning Lanz and Senna's sacrifices were able to seriously weaken the faction on a fundamental level. Of course, another huge problem with having them die here that would need to be resolved is that we're now missing 2 character slots, causing both a lack of strong party dynamics in cutscenes and a lack of options in battle. I would argue that one space could perhaps be filled later by Nia, and maybe the other by Melia. To be fair, this would leave a fairly lengthy section of the game wherein you are seriously underpowered, which is another issue that would require remedying somehow. However, despite some of the questions this would raise, I think it's worth considering overall. Having these characters specifically take their places would work especially well, as it means no extra time would have to be spent fleshing out their backstories, because we've already seen them in the first 2 games. This is perfect, as we're already fairly close to the end of the game by the time we would get them in our party. Having them on your team would also be really cool in giving us more scenes of them interacting with the rest of the party, and would allow for more exposition to be given regarding the events of the story pre-Ionios, as they experienced all of it, and that's definitely needed in my opinion. They may also be given their own Ouroboros form, which would just be the coolest fucking thing ever, you can't deny. I also think, and this is going to be one of my hottest takes yet, so prepare yourselves, Lanz and Senna are probably the best and maybe only character pair you could do this with, as I personally view them as the weakest. I understand most people will probably disagree with this overall idea, and that's completely fair. Feel free to voice your opinions in the comments. It would certainly be a very brave choice from the writers that could end up backfiring, but I genuinely think they could pull it off. But then again, no Lanz would mean we couldn't get that awesome scene of him finally apologising and making up to Yoren at the Cloud Keep. So this one's up in the air. I've danced around properly talking about this part for long enough now, so let's finally talk about that scene. N now sends us to another prison to await Mio's homecoming in a month's time, conveniently lining up with the occurrence of a mass execution of treacherous soldiers and other such prison fodder during the eclipse. The state of things is already dire enough, but not before N drops another little nugget of information that makes matters even more tragic.
Oh yes. I almost forgot to tell you something. You are now aware of the cycle of rebirth, yes? There is an exception. Those whose flame is snuffed out during a homecoming will not return.
When a person reaches their 10th term and is not killed before that, either by natural means or having their flame clock run dry, the homecoming ceremony ceases their rebirth entirely. They are completely lost from the reincarnation cycle, removing any possibility of us meeting Mio in her next life, should she die here. And so, with the party completely out of ideas as to what to do, time begins to slip away, ember by ember, as Mio's does too. I'm in love with the way the moon is utilised here. We were told previously that the date of Mio's homecoming would be marked by an eclipse, and so the camera very cleverly repeatedly shows us the subsequent phases of a lunar cycle passing by, the moon becoming more and more full each time it's shown, representing Mio's time running out. It's another example of a great bit of iconography that was actually possibly referenced all the way back in the flute trade scene, if you guys remember. The portrayal of every character here is wonderful, of course, but Noah's is one of my favourites. There's a really gnarly piece of visual storytelling shown here, when we can see how bloodied and fucked up his knuckles have gotten from repeatedly banging his fists against the bars, showing the sheer desperation he possesses to escape. I love how this detail is actually continuous and remains being visible all the way up until the beginning of chapter 6. It's something that the artist didn't need to do, but I'm so glad they went the extra mile and did anyway. The highlight of this sequence, in my eyes though, is Noah's breakdown after hearing some of Mio's final words. When she finally reveals that she does actually want to keep on living, even though the world forbids her to, and would want to spend her remaining time with her Noah, he shatters, with this also serving as a really cool little bit of foreshadowing that will come into play later. Never in this game, or in this series for that matter, other than maybe Mithra in Torna, have we seen the total breakdown of a character on this level, and it's insanely painful yet captivating to watch. He begins to question even things he used to take completely for granted, such as whether Offseers are even worth anything in the first place, and what the point of this entire trek across Ionios even was. Everything he thought he knew is now eluding him, at this darkest hour.
I should have known that. It's unbearable. Seeing life slip away from you. Even though they're right there. What am I even doing?
Seeing Tyon snap in this scene is also phenomenal. He bangs his hand against the floor multiple times in rage and frustration, unable to bear the pain of having to let Mio go. Just as in the baby scene, this is especially striking as it's Tyon of all people acting this way. All the while Uni, Senna and Noah sob uncontrollably around him, and the music swells.
You know, I don't want this to be it. If I were given the chance, if this road I've walked were to keep on going, I'd like to spend that time with my Noah.
Look, we've had low moments in Xenoblade before. Fiora's death, the awakening of the Telethia, Pyra's sacrifice, Numa's sacrifice, the entire ending of Torna and so on, but in my eyes, nothing has even come close to matching the sheer emotion of this scene. The sense of utter despair and hopelessness is almost palpable, and you really fucking feel it. The capacity of this sequence to make people feel things is unparalleled. It's why there is such an abundance of people reacting to it specifically online, and the fact the writers were able to emotionally destroy people like this so consistently is truly admirable. It's truly difficult to make something so captivating that, even though it's a work of fiction, people become attached to it this much. Do you remember earlier how I spoke about how much of the middle section of this story specifically is comprised of scenes where characters just sit and talk, not to move the plot forward but just to talk? All of those scenes are what makes this one so painful. We've spent so much time with them, just watching them exist, and this incredible amount of characterization they've all had has managed to make them feel so remarkably human that this hurts as if we're watching a real person suffer like they are. None of this would be so tragic to watch unfold if this hadn't been done. It was all so the writers could manipulate our connection towards the characters for this singular moment. Damn you, MonolithSoft, were my tears worth it? Another thing I gotta praise here is how they weren't afraid to let Noah just cry, to properly, outwardly weep. I'm always a fan of when a piece of media lets a male character, especially a lead, just show real emotion like this, and it's done so well in this instance. But of course, none of this would have anywhere near as much impact if his voice performance wasn't convincing. Thankfully, it's on another fucking level here. I've seen many people discuss this online, but another aspect of what makes this whole sequence feel so incredible and yet horrifying to sit through is that it's unpredictable. It seems so obvious that at the last second some member of the Lost Numbers or something is going to bust through the bars and save Mio before her homecoming, but no, the well and truly is no escape at this point. As far as our characters are aware, they have completely and utterly lost. That sense of sheer desperation, at least to this level, is rare to come across. The month has passed, and it is the day of the eclipse. Our heroes are dragged against their will to the courtyard, and forced to watch in horror as Mio is remorselessly sent on by a procession of Offseers. But this time, the melody being played has been imbued with a new meaning. It's no longer beautiful or serene, but horrifying and unnatural. I love how the main melody here has been changed to a slightly higher pitch to accommodate for the change in context. I'll play both to see if you guys can notice what I mean. As if the situation couldn't be any more twisted, En rubs salt in the wound by throwing an already mentally broken Noah his flute to accompany the other Offseers as they perform the melody that will mark Mio's departure from this world. Hands trembling in dismay, he reluctantly begins to pick it up, but it's too late. His beloved disintegrates into the signature golden mote of mortality before his very eyes, uttering 4 simple words that break his world into 1,000 tiny pieces once more.
It's been fun, Noah.
Mio!
En unsheaths his blade and decapitates his other half, and the screen immediately goes dark.
Huh?
I find it humorous to imagine if, instead of being delivered through the format of a game, this story was an animated TV series that aired weekly, and the Chapter 5 ending acted as the cliffhanger between episodes. Can you imagine the commotion it would cause online? Nobody would have even an inkling of an idea as to where the narrative was going to go next, and neither did we when we were playing the game ourselves. Everything is completely up in the air. Would our characters be forced to be reborn into the cycle, with no memory of everything that's happened up till this point? Or maybe would we follow an entirely new cast of characters, who have just become Ouroboros for the first time themselves, following in these heroes' footsteps? Perhaps not, but the response to that would be amazing to witness, I can't lie. Noah awakes in a sort of dream world, surrounded by a mysterious white mist as visions of him living lives which are not his own play out in sequence around him. A strange hooded child gives him recollections of prior existences he has no memory of. There's one where he gets incredibly close to beating Zed, but is defeated at the last second. A really neat little detail here is that he actually got as close as somehow entering Origin, as seen through the red lights in the background. There's one where he runs away from it all, dying in the middle of a blizzard in the freezing cold, and one where he has a child. But through all these individual incarnations, there is always but one constant. He and Mio meet and fall in love. The exact cause of this is never explained, which I will complain an unhealthy amount about later, believe me. But overall, although it's cheesy, I'm a big fan of this whole fated to be lovers in every subsequent lifetime cliche, and it works so well in this instance, as Noah and Mio's relationship is one I can genuinely buy. Part of the sorrow of their dynamic is that, perhaps due to their original ages at the intersection, in every life Mio dies first, a year before Noah, forcing him to watch, unable to do anything about it as she fades away into those frustratingly familiar motes. Once again, today, this same sorrowful sequences of events has unfolded, but, as the strange youth in front of him queries, will he once again ask to linger in the endless now? We cut to our last flashback of a prior life and finally witness the birth of N, a version of Noah who simply couldn't take having to lose Mio one more time and was willing to do anything to make it stop, even siding with his sworn enemy and helping to perpetuate the world that had always been the cause of all of his pain, even becoming Mobius. Zed saw an opportunity in N, someone who possessed an unshakable resolve and yet posed a real threat, and seek to both utilize that resolve to strengthen Mobius and take away that threat in the same single action, like moving a chess piece on a board. And, as is painfully obvious to us now, it worked. At this point, N was willing to do just about anything to escape from this wretched cycle of misery, to be able to be with his beloved forever. Before I go on, I want to dive a little bit deeper into one of the flashback scenes from this sequence that has always stuck with me the most. It's the one where N leaves his child in the forest. This one individual scene can be viewed as a sort of microcosm, representing the sheer extent of sorrow this story as a whole is trying to impart upon you. Personally, I actually think that this here might be the most emotional moment in the entire game for me, even more than the prison scene. There's just something about Noah and his child's delivery here that feels so fragile and so uncomfortably real that it hurts every time I rewatch it. And just think about what this poor kid has had to go through, man. Not soon after being born, he witnessed his mother die, and then only a year after, his father fades too, leaving him entirely alone in the world. This version of Noah and Mio must have known that this was what making the choice to have a child in this world would mean, but I'm sure it didn't make it any less painful for them. You can entirely understand how something as heartbreaking as this could be the last straw that finally draws N over to the side of Mobius. After confirming to the child, not that one, this one, that he will not take the same path as his other self, no matter how much it hurts, Noah awakes, unharmed, alongside a very confused N. M, not Mio, marches towards him and hands over not his flute but Mio's. I, like many people I'm sure, didn't quite catch the significance of this on my first playthrough, but it serves as a really clever little hint that this is our own Mio before it's revealed outright in about 30 seconds or so. She was showing that she possessed the memory of their flute exchange in the Mac for Wildwood, and so knew her flute was now his. A memory only Mio could ever have, as that sequence of events never played out for M. The pieces begin to fall into place as N gradually realises what has happened, and now it is time for another Noah to break, just like our own had done.
What? Impossible. You're... Ouroboros. Does that mean... Back then, the two of you... So... The one who died is...
We always presumed that the consciousness swapping ability was temporary, but this wasn't actually the case. M used it to switch places with Mio, aware that the latter's body was about to expire and wanting to give her more time. This also had the bonus of jiving well with her own ambitions, as she'd been wanting to die for a while now due to the obligation being Mobius came with, the necessity of taking countless innocent lives. What's more, her pain of having to live as such an unholy being was emphasised even further due to the perverted imitation of his former self N had become, as we've been made more than aware of throughout all our encounters with him. M's speech to Mio here is simply beautiful, and it eloquently articulates everything that is so sick about Mobius. They are a foul contagion, a blight upon the world that fundamentally ascribes no meaning to life, tossing it around like a mere plaything, and it has to end. M agrees to hand over her body if Mio can help finally make this happen, and can finally free the world from the prison Mobius has had it trapped in for so long. If we recall what happened earlier for a minute, M's undeniably heartbreaking story and her directive for Mio was what caused her to release that singular tear. All in all, it's an incredible moment of foreshadowing that is followed up on in the most satisfying way possible. You can probably tell from how I'm talking about it, but I don't view this twist as a cheap cop-out the same way I see many of the earlier, and indeed later, instances of fake-out deaths or characters coming back to life. While this may be how it appears on a surface level, it has to be considered that Mio did still die on that day, it's just that it wasn't our own Mio. And even if it had been, with M still being a part of the story, it's very likely she would have just taken Mio's place anyway, and would have ended up ultimately merging into what is effectively the same character. Plus, this switcheroo having happened allows for another of the story's best moments to take place, N's freakout. This scene is memed on so much in the community, and look, I get why. Just like the maternity ward, it straight up looks goofy as fuck without context. But with context, it's, and I find myself having to use this word time and time again when talking about this game, tragic. N has just witnessed his lover become so disillusioned with the man he has become that she voluntarily effectively took her own life to be rid of him, and to hopefully teach him how fundamentally wrong his actions are and how much they had been hurting her all along. The problem is, he simply can't understand it. He can't wrap his head around how maybe she never wanted to come back in the first place, and how she wasn't thankful for him going to the lengths of taking hundreds of lives just so she can exist alongside him. He can't comprehend that.
She didn't want forever. She wanted to be there with you.
And from my point of view, that utter lack of comprehension he possesses is what truly makes N such a brilliant and tragic antagonist. Just like before, Harry McIntyre's performance as N here is nothing short of chill-inducing, with maybe my personal favourite delivery of any line in the game by him being,
Watch me! Rewind our clocks! Back to the start! Noah! My long shadow. You have stolen her away from me. I will extinguish you and take her back! Mio is mine! She's not yours. She's mine. You are nothing. She belongs only to me!
I think part of what makes N's presentation here so compelling is how unpredictable it is. The relatively stoic, composed individual we've been seeing up until now has cracked, and how he acts next is anyone's guess. It's genuinely scary to watch him unravel in front of our eyes like this, especially since he's essentially the same person as the character we've been following and admiring all this time, and we never could have imagined he had the capacity for this within him. Ultimately, I don't have much else to say regarding this scene, other than the further heaps of praise I could throw upon it, but I don't want to waste your time on that. I think everyone who clicked on this video, and who has hopefully played the game, knows full well how phenomenal this scene is already, after all. Another major plot beat around this time, Shania taking her own life, is undeniably dark. It's perhaps the darkest place this series has gone thus far, but again, as Shania isn't a character I'm particularly compelled by, I found it hard to feel much in regards to it, other than sheer shock that they went there. Still, I respect the writers here for not being afraid to shy away from such sensitive topics as suicide, despite this being a Nintendo game after all. I've seen this meme being thrown around online, and it's always funny to see because it's so obvious whenever anyone posts it that they've never played a Xenoblade game. If you do count them as first-party Nintendo, of course. Just before this, X had revealed that the Agnes Castle also had its own annihilator, and she used it to seemingly obliterate the city, having had its location be leaked by Shania. Although this ends up being a bit of a fake out with Mio having tipped them off at the last second, the city itself is a giant Varonis and so can move location, because of course it can. Everything is a giant mech in this series at this point. I really like that this moment is here, as it seeks to somewhat justify the stance we've seen held by some of the city's denizens earlier, the ones who view trying to free the soldiers from the war as needlessly dangerous, exposing themselves to unnecessary risk. Maybe then they're right after all, who can say, but I still think it's incredibly important to at least have the resolve to want to help others who are suffering unjustly, even if to do so could expose yourself to danger. Slightly later on, we learn a bit more about the story of N and M when we visit the site of the former city. As it turned out, the city our party had visited is not the original, and there was at least one more which existed before the current. Today, it stands in ruins, destroyed as a result of Zed's order for N to slaughter the city and its people in order to pledge his allegiance towards Mobius, as well as to gather the necessary life embers required to revive Mio as M. Overall, I'm a big fan of this plot beat. It's undeniably a huge step for N to take, as to willingly kill all of your own descendants just to be with your lover one more time isn't exactly reasonable, and so I can understand the complaint that it's too extreme, but it's worth acknowledging that a part of his rationality had likely been lost at this point. Being forced to watch firsthand the futility of your actions in every single past life, without fail a repeating tragedy on loop, would surely make anyone go even just a little bit insane. Let me be clear, I am not defending N's actions here. They are undeniably wicked and irredeemable. After all, he is a villain, he's not one of our protagonists. Technically. It's just that I can totally understand how he was driven to this point. Zed had dangled a carrot in front of Noah with Mio, then threatened to take it away unless he carried out this horrific act. And, under that immense pressure, in what was likely a split-second decision in that very moment, N agreed. I want to give props to his facial expression after he's done with the deed. There's just this absolutely dead, empty look in his eyes which portray the state of his now broken psyche. They say that the eyes are a window to the soul, and nowhere does this hold true more than with N in this instance. The light behind his eyes has faded. To make this scene even more painful, we are graciously allowed to see M's reaction to what he's done. And, just like most of the plot beats in this emotional rollercoaster of a story, it's heartbreaking. We are also given what is a very vague explanation as to how Noah and Mia were able to be reborn as separate entities to N and M, even if they still existed at the same time. After all, it seemed a pre-established rule that when someone becomes Mobius, they are taken out of the cycle. The one we are given is that N and M's inward regrets over what they have turned into are so strong that they were reborn as manifestations of their repentance. Overall, while I'm not going to get into it too much here, as I'll have a whole, much longer section dedicated to it later, I'm not entirely satisfied by this explanation, especially since it's the only piece of information we're given on the topic. It's just too vague and interpretive for my liking, but for now, I have nothing else to say on the matter. Just you wait though.